Hello everyone, welcome to session 7 of Legal Tuesdays, our series looking at key legal issues rising in the film and television industries. So today we'll continue our look at some of the key agreements and contracts that you'll commonly encounter when you're working in the industry. And as previously, these are not intended to be exhaustive, far from it, but really they are intended to give a flavour of the crucial importance of having in place appropriate and effective contracts, whatever the nature of your involvement in a project. So the first type of agreement I want to discuss is the depiction release. Releases will commonly be required by content producers depending on the source or sources of their material, and releases are not dissimilar to licenses, which we discussed in an earlier session. So the starting point here is that any identifiable product, location or individual who is used in content should ideally be the subject of a specific agreement or release with the appropriate party specifically authorising the use in the project. Now, with regard to people, the question of life rights becomes significant. Life rights refers to the rights an individual has in their own life story. As a matter of English law, there is ordinarily no obligation to purchase the rights to someone else's life story. Now that's different as a matter of US law. However, if you want to tell someone else's story, entering into a depiction release with the subject individual, although strictly not a requirement, again as a matter of English law, it may still provide valuable protections. So depiction releases are essentially a bundle of rights that enable you to depict an individual and their story in your film or television production. The rights granted in a depiction release will usually afford some measure of protection against future lawsuits from the subject individual, alleging, for example, defamation or invasion of privacy or similar. Now, where inspiration for a project comes from real life or real individuals, as it commonly does, fictionalizing some element of the story or the characters in question can avoid the need for a depiction release. But if you're going down this path, tread carefully. Thin disguises are unlikely to be effective. Similarly, disclaimers such as any resemblance to actual persons living or dead is purely coincidental will not necessarily immunize you from liability should the subject individual decide to issue a lawsuit. So if you are using or referring to the stories of real identifiable individuals in your project, try to obtain a depiction release. Now, the second related type of agreement I want to talk about is the location release. These are very similar in concept to depiction releases. They are essentially contractual permissions to use or film on or in specific locations. And they become very important given that most filmmakers will film at least some of their project on location. Now, depending on where you want to film your project, there will be specific rules and regulations with regard to the appropriate permissions which should be investigated. But as a general rule, shooting on location without a specific depiction release can give rise to unwanted legal exposures. For example, if you are shooting on private land or property without an appropriate location release, you could be exposing yourself to a trespass action from the landowner. Similarly, depending on the specific circumstances, the landowner may be able to sue the filmmaker for invasion of privacy or publicity or even copyright or trademark infringement. So in addition to these potential legal exposures, not having in place appropriate location releases may make securing insurance for your project that much more difficult, which in turn will make selling the project to distributors very difficult. Those distributors will be looking at potential legal liabilities when they're purchasing content, and the absence of specific location releases will be a very significant factor for them. Now, all of that said, location releases are not always required. In the UK, in certain circumstances at least, people are free to film in public spaces, provided they do not intrude upon individuals' reasonable expectations of privacy. It will, of course, depend on the specific locality in which you're filming, however. So, as a matter of best practice, if you do want to shoot on location, you should always approach the council or the local regional body to investigate what permissions, if any, are required. And the final point to make on location releases is that they do not generally cost that much to put in place. And given the potential downsides of not having the appropriate releases in place, they really are advisable. Generally, the more recognizable the location, the more important the location releases become. And finally today, I want to touch on distribution agreements. These will of course come to the fore at a more advanced stage in the project, probably when it's nearing completion, when hopefully the project is starting to get some interest from distributors, whether it's a film festival or market or otherwise. So distributors will be looking to acquire, usually by license, the rights to distribute the content in particular jurisdictions or territories for a particular period of time. So the distribution agreement will be the contract governing the rights of a particular distributor or broadcaster to distribute the content in the specific territory for the specific period of time. And this will usually be in exchange for a distribution commission, which will be equal to a percentage of the revenues generated in the specific territory. So from the perspective of content producers, these agreements really are critical. They'll be negotiated on the basis of the specific circumstances that you find yourself in, but ensuring that the agreement is fair and truly reflects what you want it to reflect in terms of what you think was agreed is key. They will also set out, or should set out, the distributor's obligations with regard to your content, or may try to carve out specific obligations of the distributor. So from a content producer's perspective, reviewing these agreements carefully is also key. So that's it for today. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do join us next time when we'll talk about the importance of having appropriate insurance in place for your project. I know that sounds exciting, so I'll see you there.